The greatest tragedy that a person can face is the loss of a child. However, no matter how terrible this situation is, it can turn into something worse. For example, when a grieving parent is mistakenly accused of the death of their own children, although in some cases there is no crime at all. The following people had to go through this incomprehensible test. James Richardson. On October 25, 1967, James and his wife Annie Mae went to work, leaving their 7 children in the care of a neighbor named Betsy Reese. During the day, all the children, aged 2 to 8, began to feel ill, and by the next morning they were dead. An autopsy showed that they had eaten food that had been laced with poison. A deadly insecticide called parathion was later found in Richardson's barn. Suspicion fell on James, since an insurance agent had come to his house the day before the poisoning, offering to buy life insurance policies for the children. Richardson was interested in buying, but the deal fell through. The poor worker simply did not have enough money to pay. This circumstance was not mentioned in court, the jury only knew that the agent had come. In addition, the prosecution presented testimony from prison informants who claimed to have heard James confess to the crime. The father, who lost 7 children at once, was sentenced to death by electric chair, although the sentence was later reduced to 25 years in prison. In 1989, it was revealed that Betsy Reese, who was in a nursing home, had repeatedly confessed to poisoning the Richardson children. 2 employees of the facility were willing to confirm this under oath. At the time of the murders, Reese was on parole for fatally shooting her second husband. Years earlier, her first husband had also died under suspicious circumstances after eating a meal Betsy cooked. A prison informant later recanted his testimony about James's confession. This new evidence forced the Florida Supreme Court to overturn James Richardson's conviction, and he was released from prison. Betsy Reese was never charged. Michelle Murphy. On September 12, 1994, 17-year-old Michelle Murphy woke up in her Tulsa, Oklahoma, home. She was horrified to find her 3-month-old son Travis lying on the kitchen floor with multiple stab wounds. Police arrived at the scene at 6 a.m., and by 2 p.m. Michelle had confessed. The hours-long interrogation, of which only the last 20 minutes were recorded, took place without the minor's parents present. 3 hours before the child's body was discovered, police received a call from a 14-year-old neighbor of Murphy's named William Lee, who claimed that he had been walking outside and heard Michelle arguing heatedly with Travis's biological father. The crew responded to the call, but no one opened the door and they left the scene. When detectives visited the teenager, he added that he returned to the Murphy house 1.5 hours later and, looking through the window, saw Michelle standing over Travis's body, which was covered in blood. This time, Lee did not call 911, but simply went home. Despite the fact that there was no trace of blood on the girl, and the knife was never found, she was charged with the murder of her son. Lee confirmed his testimony at the preliminary hearing, but died soon after, so only his speech, recorded on tape, was played in court. And although Travis's father denied the claims that he was in the Murphy house that night, the prosecution was able to obtain a guilty verdict. Michelle was sentenced to life in prison. However, the prosecution concealed from the jury that type 4 blood was found at the murder scene, which did not belong to Michelle, Travis, or his father. The mother would serve another 10 years in prison before the data was officially released. In 2014, Michelle Murphy's conviction was overturned and she was released from custody. A year later, she was awarded $175,000 in compensation from the state of Oklahoma. Despite the judge's ruling, the prosecutor who appeared on the prosecution's side continued to publicly state that he believed Murphy was guilty. David Camm. David Camm was a former police officer who lived in Georgetown, Indiana with his wife Kim and their 2 children, 7-year-old Brad and 5-year-old Jill. On September 28, 2000, David returned home to find his wife and children shot to death in their garage. He was charged with the murders after brown blood was found on his t-shirt. Camm claimed that the blood had gotten on his clothes while he was trying to revive his son. 11 witnesses testified that he was at a basketball game at the time of the family's death, but the prosecution rejected this alibi. The motive was suggested to be that David killed his loved ones to collect a large payout on their life insurance policies. At trial, David Camm was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and sentenced to 195 years in prison. What the prosecution failed to disclose, however, was that a sweatshirt with someone else's DNA was found at the crime scene. That DNA and a palm print on a family SUV would eventually lead police to Charles Boney, an 11-time convicted robber who targeted women. When questioned, Boney claimed that he had conspired with David, who had carried out the shooting himself. In 2006, Camm faced a second trial and was convicted again thanks to Boney's testimony. Years later, David won a third trial. This time, the defense presented additional samples of Boney's DNA, which had been found under Kim's fingernails. This convinced the jury that the robber was solely responsible for the murders, and David Camm was finally acquitted in October 2013. Charles Boney is currently serving a sentence for the murders of Camm's wife and children. Debbie Loveless and John Harvey Miller. In 1989, Debbie Loveless and her husband John Harvey Miller were living in Emory, Texas, with 4-year-old April, Debbie's daughter from a previous marriage. According to the couple, the girl was playing near their home when she was attacked by a pack of dogs and seriously injured. The child was rushed to the hospital, where she died on the operating table. From the beginning, police were skeptical of the couple's story and believed that dogs could not have caused the injuries. The medical examiner confirmed their suspicions when he concluded that April had cut wounds on her body. Less than 2 weeks later, Debbie and John were charged with April's murder. A hunting knife, believed to have been used to inflict the injuries, was found in their home. At trial, the couple's lawyers did not even attempt to present evidence to support their story of a dog attack, so Debbie and John were both found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Years later, the couple retained a new appellate attorney who was able to obtain post-mortem photographs of April. He was surprised to find bruises on her body in the shape of dog paws. Numerous experts who had seen the photographs believed that they confirmed a dog attack. Furthermore, a re-examination of April's clothing found traces of dog saliva and hair on it. Although the child's body did indeed contain actual lacerations, they were actually inflicted during surgery at the hospital when surgeons were trying to access a damaged artery in her thigh. In December 1993, Debbie Loveless and John Harvey Miller had their convictions overturned and were released from prison. David and Cynthia Dowaliby. In 1988, 7-year-old Jacqueline lived in Chicago with her mother Cynthia and stepfather David. On the morning of September 10, the Dowalibys woke up to find that Jacqueline was missing from her bedroom, and that the basement window was broken. 4 days later, the girl's body was found in a field behind an apartment building located 5 kilometers from the family's home. She had been strangled with a rope. Local residents were shocked by what happened and demanded that the police find and punish the culprit. The most obvious candidate for this role then seemed to be the child's biological father, because he had previously attempted to kidnap his daughter from home. However, when checking the man, it turned out that he was in prison at the time of the crime. Then David and Cynthia will be charged with the girl's murder. Detectives believed that the basement window had actually been broken from the inside, and that the kidnapping was staged. The primary evidence against the Dowaliby family was the testimony of a witness named Everett Mann, who lived in the house where Jacqueline's body was found. Despite being 70 meters away from where the girl lay, Mann claimed to have seen a car driven by a white man leaving the house on the night of the abduction. Mann would later identify the driver as David Dowaliby, stating that he recognized him by the similar structure of his nose. Since there was no hard evidence linking Cynthia to the crime, the trial judge decided to acquit her before the jury had even retired to deliberate. However, David was still convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison. In 1991, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that there was insufficient evidence against the man and overturned his conviction. It is believed that Jacqueline's killer may have been Timothy Hess, her biological father's brother, who suffers from schizophrenia. He initially had an alibi, but it fell apart when checked. Hess also knew specific details about the girl's murder that were never made public, but which the man claimed were told to him by a spirit. However, Chicago police still stick to their original version that the Dowalibys were responsible for Jacqueline's death.